Thank you for tuning in to Sparks and Honey's Daily Culture Briefing. My name is Ben Grinspan, and today we're going to be looking at culture in the vertical, using Q, our cultural intelligence system, to unpack trends and changes in human behavior. And you're joining us for a very special briefing today. We have an incredible set of guests joining us on the panel. I'll be playing maybe hopefully more moderator than my usual role to have a really fascinating conversation about the intersection of inclusion and marketing. This isn't out, obviously. It is March. It is no longer Black History Month, but that doesn't mean the themes from Black History Month aren't incredibly important and part of our dedication here at the briefing. So we wanted to go deep into our sort of marketing, advertising, creative roots and bring on some leaders, both from our own space and from our extended network, to have this conversation and to get at some of that those big questions about inclusion. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And Davion Harris, I'd love you to introduce yourselves to our panel today, to everybody today.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Good to be here. My name is Davion Harris. I'm Chief Client Officer at Sparks and Honey, and I also lead our Equitable Futures practice. So really thinking about how the role of equity and inclusion is really embedded into all that we do from an organization, thinking about consulting work, business transformation, and what we'll focus on today, storytelling and content.
Amazing. Fresh off a train from Pennsylvania with
Fresh
Lola,
off the
Bakare.
train.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Davion. Always wonderful to see my Penn classmates.
I was going to say, big news for University of Pennsylvania.
We graduated in 2021, so. But everyone, yes, it's great to be here. And Gary is my favorite person to collab with since Clubhouse days, actually. And of course, Ben, you know I'm a super fan of yours.
Yeah.
So I am a CMO advisor and inclusive marketing strategist. Recently added author to my title, or will be adding when the book is finished. I am writing a book about responsible marketing, and that is sort of the key focal point of my relevance to being in this room. But the other things I do when advising CMOs, everything from leadership to messaging to strategy to sort of team dynamics. And I also focus a lot on the dynamics of women in marketing. So all the things.
Love it.
So and I talk too much on LinkedIn, too.
Well, that happens to the best of us.
See, he thinks so.
Yeah. So stop. And of course, we have Gary J. Nix, who is a familiar face. Sparks and Honey, I was going to say you're a super friend. Let's put it at this point. An amplifier and a big thinker, and you're right. So Gary, give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I'm the founder and chief strategist of a small agency called the Brandarchist Strategy as a Service. There are three major tenets that we have, one being cultural intelligence and fluency, two being intentional, so being thoughtful about the things you're doing, and three, and most important to us, approaching the brand as a verb instead of as a noun, because it's much more powerful when you approach it as a verb.
Yeah, I love that. That is going to be so relevant for today's briefing. So like I said, we're talking about this space, this, there's a double meaning to this, obviously, right? Today we're talking about brand performance versus performative. And sometimes performance can be a good thing. We want brands, we want institutions to show up for their consumers, for their base. We want them to say we understand what they're going through, especially when it comes to really complex things like, identity and marginalization and just the crazy world that we live in. At the same time, brands are brands. They have money they have to make. They have bottom lines. And so our guiding question today, and I just thought I'd get this out before we start our dissecting this a little bit, is how can brands and marketers show they care about the needs of consumers, especially marginalized ones, while still focusing on the bottom line? How do we create an engagement that is both meaningful and ultimately profitable? So there's a little bit of a tension here that I think you're going to see in all of this, and I think we have just the right minds together to figure out how to navigate this tension in a way that is equitable and also, keeps us employed, keeps the lights on in this studio, right? So let's start here. I want to start with a couple intro questions because I think this is a complex enough topic that we do need a little bit of a cultural warm up here. And you can see, literally, I'm very curious about what does it mean for a brand to show up for its consumers. I think we have heard enormously about that in the past couple years. It is one of those things that is talked about often more than it is defined, if that makes sense. So I would love to get in there and Lola.
I'm burning to throw out a one-sentence answer to this because I think it's so much simpler than we make it. For a brand to show up for its customers, especially those that are marginalized, all a brand needs to do is align its core strengths with the real needs of its most marginalized consumers or even target consumers. Core strengths,
Yeah.
real needs. You align those, everybody's happy, and everybody's making money.
Okay, so I get the core strengths. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm going to ask you to unpack what you mean by the real needs.
The real needs. What are the unmet needs that are what I like to call brand relevant? So there are so many examples of this, but one that always makes everyone, I'm talking to, like, sort of lean forward and say, aha. And I can say this because I didn't make it up. It's not my program. But MasterCard's true name, I think we even talked about that last time. You think about the real needs when it comes to credit cards of a transgender consumer. It is to not have that moment of fear and being outed at the point of sale.
Yeah.
So what do they do with True Name? They solve that problem. Boom. And because they solve that problem, they're showing up for a consumer who's more likely to now choose them. And of course, they get the upside of those of us who feel like human rights are important, choosing them as well.
Yeah, interesting. So let me ask you then, when we see, it's March, right? It's Women's History Month. Sometimes we see the word she or her inserted into something. The Fox Weather app, or the Fox Weather station is doing women in weather all month long, right? Which is an interesting thing for them to do, I suppose. And maybe that feels realer, but is the she and her, like, is how do we draw the line between a real need and a non-real need?
Is there utility?
Yes, okay.
We all like took the basics of econ, right? Like, for there to be demand, there must be utility.
Yeah.
And if you're just throwing the word she in something, there may or may not be utility. I think you could argue that what Eminem showed us when they were woke for a minute, and I use woke in a positive reference point, is that, wow, well, maybe doing something on PAC can actually change the way young girls or, young people who are not men look at themselves and perceive the world and feel pride. So that's a place where something that's a performance isn't necessarily performative, right?
Yeah.
But if there's no utility at all,
Yeah.
like the weather, people would have to explain the utility. I don't quite get it off the cuff, but maybe it's there.
Yeah, I hope it's there, but I'm with you on that.
And I think to that point, because I love the MasterCard example, brands sometimes confuse something that's simple and specific, and with the Fox example where it's, okay, you're making a statement that's simple, but in a way that's not, helpful ultimately.
Right.
And when I think about, this whole conversation and what it means to show up, I think brands sometimes get caught up in trying to do something that's so complex and so grandiose, if you will, whereas you take to your point that, okay, what is one need? I mean, there's many needs if you think about the trans community, but you take something that's very tangible and then act on it, then you are showing up, you're creating that sense of performance for your consumers and also your brand.
Exactly, and it's easy to find it when you just focus on what you make.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you do?
Yeah, Gary?
It's also easy to focus on when you understand exactly who you're speaking with, right?
Absolutely.
So if you take the MasterCard example, and the last time I was here, I was like, oh, MasterCard, I worked with them, so let me jump into this conversation.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about MasterCard is they don't choose who gets their card. So they found something that they could actually control and show that they are providing care, value, and impact for the people who they want to use that card, because that's how they make their money. So even though they don't have the full control over who gets a card, their partners do, they still need people to use that card in order for them to make money. So if they show that they care about those people, and they're doing things that are in their control to serve them correctly, which goes back to the need that you're talking about, then it makes sense.
Yeah.
And then it also has the impact. When you do something at surface level, like this, what it sounds like this Fox Weather example is, or the Hershey's example,
Right.
when they just highlighted the she in Hershey's.
Which is crazy because her was right there, but yeah.
Hey, don't talk about my people like that. It's 20 minutes away from my hometown.
I mean,
No,
look,
it
sometimes
was
people
a
get it
lot.
wrong.
Yeah.
And it's oh, well, here's something we can do, but how does it serve people, or does it serve them at all?
I mean, and I don't know. I mean, this is where I go back. That one, and I'm still on the fence about that particular on-pack example too, because again, what is the utility of the pride someone might feel buying it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's debatable.
Yeah.
But it's also the feeling, though, also, right? Because it's also about the emotional connection.
Yes.
Right.
So let me ask a follow-up about that, because I think, we talk about, we're talking about all of this, obviously, with an intersectional lens, right? And what I'm curious about is, do we show up differently for different demographics or for different identity questions? Is it different to show up during Black History Month as it is during Women's History Month, as it is to show up for people based on age? Is there a critical nuance there that we need to recognize?
We're asking two questions, right?
Yeah, okay.
So the one is, should a Heritage Month determine how you show up throughout the year? Of course it shouldn't.
Yeah.
If anything, it can serve as a useful springboard, a moment to focus. If you decide not to do, a two white men panel like a brand that I just saw yesterday, I think it was Momentive.ai. Sorry, I'm just doing it because it was just like, Women's History Month, this is an interesting time to do an Adam Grant moment. But anyway, so if you decide to use that to focus in and then spread that sort of care of a particular consumer segment throughout the year, great. But if you're doing something different than what you always do, no. So that's one question. But the other thing you asked, I think, is really important too. And it's that, again, how you show up determines what you need to do. What problems need to be solved? What value needs to be created? And how do you do that in a way that always goes back to the core of your identity? And how you fuel your shareholders' sort of pocket. If you're a public company, or your owners if you're private. At the end of the day, and this is where I can sound very capitalist of it all, but like,
you're insane. This is a capitalist space.
Of course it is. It's Omnicom,
And we're at 40. We are in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. If it's not capitalist here, where is it?
So it's sort of like, how do we align those goals with those other goals? And when those two goal sets come together, that's where we have an answer to, yes, you should focus here. If they don't, if it's just because you think it's a nice philanthropic thing to do, or because you think it's the sort of selling thing to do, neither of those will have long-term utility.
Right. This is the perfect example as brand as verb. Right? Because how do you show up? Who do you show up for? Well, who is your customer?
Exactly.
Right? Your job, literally at every touch point, is to show up for that customer. Right? Whether it's through your product or service, or through the shared values that both sides should hold.
And we're going to get into more about that in a second, because MasterCard is not just showing up for the trans people who have changed their name, who are using their credit card. They're showing up for everybody who cares about them and being in a world like that. But Lola, we have to move on, because Lola, you almost brought this up, and I thought this was really valuable and something I'd love to get to. And Davian, maybe you could start us. Is there a clear line today between defining brand values and like defining market bottom lines? Is there a place where we say, this is for us to perform as a brand to show we care, and this is how we perform for our shareholders? Is there a fine line there? How do we define that? What's a C-suite to do?
I mean, I think, as you said, Lola started teeing that conversation up, because when you separate the two, then something's going to give it at some point. You might be successful in the short term in terms of, gaining, consumer attention, because you do something flashy or put something out there that people latch on to, or, you're focused on that performative side and your stakeholders get excited, et cetera, because it's, moving the business forward in some way. But then your consumers are going to catch on to that, right, and then move away from you. So it has to be that balance, and going back to that alignment, and thinking about, the organizational DNA. How are your values as an organization, as you point out, going to enable you to show up for your consumers? And that's where you get into authenticity, because otherwise you're just sort of, tackling on or adding something on that doesn't work, and trying to force fit, and create this sense of authenticity. And that's where you get into performative, manufactured space, versus if it's really who you are as a brand, and your, whether it's your core offering, your strengths, again, your values. And that goes back to even as we think about purpose. And 10, 15 years ago, when brands were thinking, I guess at this point, 20 years ago, corporate social responsibility, it was this leg over here. And then the regular, core brand activities were over here, moving forward. And then ultimately brands realized, oh, wait, we need to make sure this all aligns. Otherwise, consumers are just going to feel that we're we're performing.
So that line, you're arguing that that line is actually a hindrance in many ways, right? You should almost act like there is no line.
It needs to be embedded. It needs to be
There is
within.
no line.
It shouldn't be, yeah.
There's never been a line.
Interesting.
That's the thing I don't understand about this moment in time. It's like we forgot what we've always been doing. This reminds me of a moment at Cannes last year, and I was like, I don't want to be that person. Like, at Cannes last year. It was the first time I
Picture
ever
her
went.
with an Aperol
It took me
Spritz,
38 years to go. It was the first time I ever went, so I can say at Cannes last year. There was a gentleman who came to the CMO Accelerator program, and I forget his name, but he's one of the renowned CMOs of Unilever Global.
Yeah.
Lovely British guy. And he was talking about how Unilever was established way back when it was established, whenever it was, 1700s, 1800s, something like that, in order to encourage people to take on new ways of caring for themselves, of cleansing themselves, of eating safely. These sort of things that we're just being learned should be new behaviors. That was the value that created value. Value is a word that has one definition, and it's rooted in money.
Yeah.
So these two things, there's never been a line between them.
Yeah.
And brands who understand that thrive.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think, interesting enough, value is often measured in money, but it means more than money, right?
Say more, yeah.
Because there's the part that someone finds valuable that is not attached to price, right?
What's an example of that?
So, okay, example, these. Did I buy these because they were a great price? No.
You bought them because they were expensive.
So,
The value is status.
in my sneakerhead world, these aren't expensive, but they're not cheap. They're not value priced as we use the word value sometimes, right? And the value is the value to me, the value that's in here, right? This is what's making me say, oh, I want these.
But does that not directly determine your willingness to pay?
No, it does. So
Right.
what I'm saying is, it's not only the price, because that's where the mistake seems to happen. Like we talk about needing to take care of the shareholders, which of course we want to do, but what are shareholders most worried about? Making money.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So if you are serving the people who are giving you money, the people who are buying from you, and you do that well, while a shareholder might get scared at certain points, if the result says, well, people are buying from us because we're doing things this way, even though you might be scared or you might not understand it, at the end of the day, the shareholder is fine with it because they're getting what they want out of it.
Well, and
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
No, I agree, but I only wanted to open it up a little bit more because what seems to happen, at least in my experience, over 28 years, is that we take the definition of value and we shrink it to something that we almost silo it. We silo it in price when it's the decision, the catalyst is here. We use this up here to justify what we're going to do. And a lot of ways sometimes that we're taught or that we have been taught is that, oh, you have to hit this no, it always starts here.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we
I
have
think
to- so we have to
the AMA
consider that.
definition of marketing takes us there. Like, anybody familiar with this? It's marketers create, communicate, distribute, maybe delivers in there too, value
Yes.
to consumers. So I think maybe it's the difference between a small v definition of value, like, value as in it was at the dollar store or whatever, which can have heart value to a lot of people.
Yeah.
It can.
Or the sort of big V value, which is the value it's offering from a holistic standpoint. I think big V value connects directly to bottom line value.
No, I totally agree with you there. It's just that I don't think we talk about big V value enough. Or sometimes we try
Agreed,
to break down
100%.
big V value into
Yes.
smaller Vs. It's like, no.
And we need
Big
to be
V
willing to
value is where-
fire our shareholders who are using us for arbitrage. That's another thing.
That's you're doing.
It's like, if you're not in it for the long term, like,
Right.
why do I care what you think?
Well, and think about how many corporate scandals that really, not only diminish a brand, but beat the hell out of its stock price are a misalignment between what shareholders are expecting and what stakeholders are expecting, right? And so much of that question, I think, here about defining a brand value versus like its bottom line is often about those sort of mismatches. And that's what's so beautiful, perhaps, about the MasterCard example, but also what's like a little off maybe about that Fox Weather one is that like it's unclear kind of what's driving the value, who the stakeholder is, why this benefits the shareholders themselves. And this is a very, I'm thrilled we're having this conversation in a corporate skyscraper.
And just to that point, I mean, it also behooves the brand from, you know, a brand equity standpoint. And when you think about the benefit that you reap when you are aligning, you know, your brand values with consumer values, right, in the market, because it's going to be only that much stickier. If you're just doing something, throwing, you know, spaghetti at the wall and different, you know, inclusivity initiatives, consumers are going to forget because they don't know who you are. And it's not representative of who you are. So when you think about that, you know, halo effect, if you will, from a marketer perspective, you want to reinforce, you know, consistently how you show up and making sure that all connects to what you do.
So I want to build on that reinforcement here, because I do think that there is a part of this conversation we need to discuss about honesty and transparency, about reinforcing your values and being really, really open with them. And so, I would love to hear what you guys think about this as practitioners, but I'm also very curious what you think some of the social implications are, especially as we have this conversation thinking about marginalized communities in mind. So let's actually break this up. I would love to hear, Lola or Gary or Davian, if you want to start, I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more about the openness, the honesty, the value of transparency when it comes to talking about brand values. Is that a thing people want to hear? Is that the kind of thing where it's like, we get it, you love the environment, you can stop talking about that? You know, like what value does that, why do we feel, why are we obligated to be honest and transparent? What do we get from that?
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's not necessarily always what we want to hear from someone, but we want to know where someone really stands. Right?
Yeah.
So what tends to happen is sometimes people use it as a megaphone. And if that trust isn't there, then it doesn't hit because it's like, okay, are you just saying this or do you actually believe it?
Yeah.
Which is why honesty and transparency ends up being important in terms of being able to sustain a program, a business, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right? Honesty and transparency elicit trust. And trust raises the probability that someone's going to buy from you.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So if we just leave it right there, that's the first level as to why honesty and transparency is important. Now, the expectation is due to the amount of information we have access to nowadays. Whether it's the right information, the wrong information, or somewhere in between. But because we have so much access and we have access to other people to have these conversations.
It's true, yeah.
That's another level as to why honesty and transparency is now important.
Yeah.
Because we as people, Gen Z has led this conversation, but we as people want to give our money to companies that share the same values that we have.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that media aspect there too, because I think that's so important that, you know, 50 years ago, there were 3 news outlets in the US, right? It was much more contained, but now everybody can be a newscaster, everyone can be an investigative reporter, and so as media proliferates, there's a higher value to being honest about your real values.
And because of that, the old ways used to do PR are not as effective, because PR has been, over time, used as a curtain.
Yes.
Or some way to just obscure information.
Yeah.
Don't work like that anymore.
Or reposition. I think that's real. I think that's very smart.
True.
Yeah.
There's no hiding anymore. There's nowhere to hide. Someone will find you and TikTok you and whatever.
Go through your garbage.
Right? Like whatever it is. But it's this liberating thing because everything Gary is saying, I completely agree with. We now have an opportunity to just be ourselves. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers when President Obama like kind of broke the ice on the whole, like, all right, it's okay for a president to have maybe smoked marijuana in his past.
Right, yeah.
Right? And then everybody just kind of let their shoulders down about it.
Yeah.
Somebody has to break the ice, and I think that's what the internet age has done for transparency. So there's 3 principles that Davian knows this. I refer to what we're talking about today as responsible marketing. And there are 3 C's that I think matter.
Yeah.
One is candor. That's what we're talking about here. It doesn't even necessarily mean you have to be saying anything good.
Yeah.
That's another thing. I think people like to hear when a brand has either messed up hasn't figured something out, is struggling.
Yeah.
They don't just want to hear the rosy part of the story. They also want conviction. What do you believe? Where do you stand? And you don't even have to stand with me necessarily for me to respect the fact that you're standing somewhere.
Yeah.
And then there's consistency. And that's what you were talking about before, Davian. I think it's sort of like, if you're not doing something that actually adds value,
Yeah.
it's not going to continue.
Yeah.
And then you lose all the magic of halo effect has always been the principle of marketing. So, I mean, this is important today because there's nowhere to hide,
Yeah.
but it has always been important.
Yes. Can I ask you to take up this second part, though? Because there's nowhere to hide. You know, everybody's on social media, everybody's able to do this. Can we throw that intersectional lens on there just very quickly? Is this different in a world where you're talking to a much more diverse audience and a much more diverse set of media people or social media that can call you to task for violating your values? What role does how does that intersectional lens play in here?
Go ahead.
So I think it's not so much that we're talking to a more diverse audience.
Okay.
It's that we're able to hear from a more diverse audience.
That's true
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
So now the people who have something to say can bring things up at scale,
Yeah.
right?
Amen.
So now it's okay. You talk about conviction. What do you actually believe in? Oh, you say you believe in this. Show us.
Yeah.
Because the other part is if someone potentially misunderstands it or thinks that there's something else that's some sort of like negative connotation to what you're saying. And it's actually a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Which does not happen that often, but it does happen.
It does happen.
The honesty and transparency saves you because you have the
Right.
proof. The key is you have to hear more. You have to listen more. That's the big key. That's why it's so much different. Because there's a paper that I just wrote, and it talks about the importance of culture. And one of the most prevalent cultures is black culture.
Right.
And the influence that it has. So instead of just in the early days of rap, just throwing a rap on a commercial
Right.
and thinking, oh, we're cool now. Now it's just like, okay, wait, no.
Yeah.
This ain't you.
Yeah.
Like, this is not really you. So now that you have to worry about that, and it's way different than being canceled, you have to actually make sure that you're doing and being who you say you actually are.
Right.
And that brings up the fact, I mean, as you were asking the other question as well, brands don't own their own narrative. I mean, and that's what you're really speaking to. I mean, all the more important that you are clear about where you stand and your values and how you show up and reinforcing that and consistency and candor. Love that as well. But ultimately, with social, with Gen Z, with, and as you bring up, in terms of the diversity of, the cohort and audiences, it's still up for interpretation. And so all the more reason that you need to lay out, all of the cards on the table so that the narrative that is built is one that's in your favor and does, again, enforce that inclusivity and, that you're showing up in the right way. But ultimately, a brand can't just, use that kind of megaphone and keep shouting about how they, value equity and inclusivity and so forth and purpose and all of these other things and expect that just to stick because they're saying it. So
Right, exactly. Because you may pay to boost that post on
But nobody
Twitter,
cares.
but someone can still go viral and be seen by 10 million more people than you.
And I think the word conversation has to come up, right? Because I love how you bring up listening, Gary. And I think that part of listening implies that there might be a call and response.
Yeah.
And I think the people who, to get to your point about the intersectionality, very respectfully, people who may not have experienced being marginalized are not used to being responded to. It's very uncomfortable for them to be responded to. So where someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda can be called out for colorism and just say, you know what, you're right, we should have thought about that. Next movie, I'm gonna think about that more.
Yeah.
No meltdown, no faux cancellation, because that's not a thing.
Yeah.
It just means there's some white dude melting down because somebody called him out. Not you, Ben.
We'll see how this goes.
I'm kidding. No, I mean, that sort of fear can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
But if we release ourselves from that fear of being responded to, it just gets really easy because it's just a conversation.
Right. And it's funny too, just because so much of what you know, the Lin-Manuel Miranda, that's a great example, because what he learned and what you see in that example is someone, and you know, I think everybody here has had their own experience this in some way, is building that muscle and being like, you know what, I don't see the world from your perspective, but now I get a little more of that, and you get a little stronger. And
Can I give an example of when I messed up? Because I want people to know I'm not some high horse person. This summer, I had said something on LinkedIn, and I said something about how we shouldn't be kowtowing to something else.
Yeah.
And then a gentleman came on and said, you know, that's very disrespectful because in Chinese culture, that's actually a very important gesture, and we shouldn't be using it as something pejorative.
Yeah.
And like, did I have that glimmer of like, I'm gonna Tucker Carlson meltdown? Maybe a little bit, but then I didn't. I chose to not.
Yeah.
You know, and then I chose to say thank you. Wow, I didn't know that, because that's the real reaction.
Yeah.
And we all have an ability to choose.
So let's put a pin in this, because I'd love to move on to our sections. Tell me about what that means for a corporation. What can a corporation learn in that similar experience?
I mean, it's like what Gary said about listening and to do the same thing.
Yeah.
To do the same thing. And to just live and roll around in that power of being the one in your category who's willing to do that. There's nothing more attractive for a brand than to have that level of humility.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
More often than not, in that crowd of naysayers at that time are people who really care about the brand.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you already have a relationship with them, you need to listen to them, because two things happen if you listen. One, you're able to explain yourself, which if it's a misunderstanding, that's fine.
Yeah.
Two, you're able to better serve the customer, right? One of the things that's interesting about the word consumer, I make a delineation with my clients and say there's two different audiences. You have the consumers, which is basically everyone who may buy from you, and your customers, the consumers who actually do buy from you. And you have to make sure that you're prioritizing and caring about your customers.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who are keeping you afloat. It's different from the customer is always right. But the customer has stake in this company. So you might want to make sure that you're listening to them.
Yeah, the customer may not always be right, but they do always have a point, you know, that needs to be valued and respected. Well, I did want to, so, okay, great. I love that we've gotten into this, but, you know, we are very lucky to be here with three very real practitioners in this space. So I thought we could go through some signals, talk about a couple interesting articles, and talk about how, like, where the rubber meets the road, how do we make marketing that is impactful and performance-driven and also comes with some inclusion to it. So let me kick off here, right? So the sign that inclusive thinking is going mainstream is that McKinsey is talking about it. So the consultant,
Sorry.
That's all right. So the consulting firm notes in their survey from from a couple quarters ago that 2 out of 3 Americans told McKinsey that their social values now shape their shopping choices, and 45% of them, representing over 100 million shoppers and the plurality of groups surveyed, believe retailers should actively support, in this case, Black-owned businesses and brands, right? That was their way of talking about what an inclusive marketer is, but you'd assume, or inclusive consumer is. So these inclusive consumers, McKinsey reports, are more likely to be young. They're also more likely to come from the Sun Belt, which I thought was very interesting. So that makes them very attractive, right? They're young, they're from growing communities, they're probably upwardly mobile. This is exactly who you want to point your marketing at, right? Asked about specifics of supporting Black-owned brands, McKinsey found that people weren't just motivated by a founder themselves or because they wanted to support small business, but literally because they felt that supporting Black businesses was the right ethical thing to do. That was that over-indexed more than any of the other choices. So in the years ahead, the report concludes, millions more consumers will likely join the ranks of the inclusive consumer, rewarding businesses that pursue inclusion and avoiding those who don't. And I think for our sake here, we can talk about inclusion as being just welcoming of everybody, bringing everybody to the table, right? That's, I think, the broadest sense here. So I got a couple questions. So is the inclusive consumer that McKinsey talking about, is that a new phenomenon, or is it just that people are finally writing reports about that? Is this something we need to think of as being a whole new category, or people finally have found a commercial voice for the values they've always had? And Davian, I'd love you to kick off.
So what I find interesting about this, and what we haven't necessarily directly spoken to, is the idea of inclusive content or marketing, et cetera, not just being for certain groups,
Right.
whether, historically marginalized audiences, et cetera, right, or underrepresented groups. And that's, I think, the shift that we're seeing in terms of the conversations, not fully, because people still, and I know we're going to get to multicultural marketing, but that, I think, partially it's pointing out that it's much bigger than that, and it's in service of a broader, quote unquote, mainstream audience relevance or receptivity when a brand is making moves to be more inclusive or connecting in an inclusive way. I also think that the attention that has been put on, the effects of non-inclusive content and the impact it has on the communities that are not being represented does affect or has been a wake up for people that might just not have thought about that. You don't, if you're reflected and you're seeing yourself your entire life, and then all of a sudden someone tells you or makes it, apparent that there's a whole group of people or groups of people that didn't have that experience, then it does change, a frame of mind in ways. So I do think there's some of that in terms of just, that narrative and kind of normalizing the idea of inclusivity being important, just, because it's the right thing to do. But I think it's also what we're seeing is that business case for inclusivity that expands beyond, again, historically marginalized groups.
Yeah, and I think that is, I think for a certain type of person, that is a very fresh insight to hear. That is the first time that they generally get the sense that this is true and that this is something that's sort of worth investing in. Lola, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts on this one, but I'll narrow it down to a few. The one is that I mean, this might be me being idealistic. I think fundamentally humans want the best for each other. There are those on the margins who maybe are caught up in not.
Right.
But I think most humans want the best for each other. And I think humans also want something to do to prove that.
Yeah.
I think that's why people hate being called racist so much, right? So this is almost like the other side of that coin. It's like if I'm able to support with my actual pocketbook businesses that may be, led by founders or owners who have been marginalized, or if I'm able to show with my pocketbook that I do believe that there should be level playing fields, then I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
Like same reason why you might, donate to whatever you donate to. This is a way to actually make that a part of your daily commercial life. So I think it's something that has always been a potential appeal that for all the reasons Davian said, now people are having options where they can actually do that.
Yeah.
I want to name the 15% pledge as one of the most important drivers of this trend across retailers. And like Gary said about the opportunity to sort of create massive change where you can, that was a Black woman who created that pledge.
Yeah.
And now people are taking 15% of their shelf space and dedicating it to Black businesses.
Yeah. So Gary, let me ask you, is this a new phenomenon or is it a phenomenon we're newly noticing?
I think it's more so a phenomenon that we're newly acknowledging, right? So if you look at things such as how much culture drives what we do, which includes just how we like to be viewed and what we buy, right? There's a cultural truth about people wanting to look good, right? Which there's some intersection of that happening here. Then you have the fact that culture drives so many things that lead us to buying something, whether it's style, whether it's cool, whether it's language.
Right.
And I think part of the fact that we have all these people talking about they want to buy from Black-owned brands is the fact of how much Black culture runs cool, how it's been deemed one of the greatest exports, global exports from the U.S. The fact that some of the performative stuff we see is actually either appropriation or cultural colonization sometimes.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you look at it from that standpoint, and looking at the things that make people buy, and put those two things together, inclusion only makes sense, whether we're just talking about Black culture or just other marginalized cultures, because what happens when you're marginalized, you have to figure out how to make something work.
Right.
And what happens a lot of times, marginalized communities don't only figure out how to make something work,
Yeah.
but they make it lit.
Yeah, they
like,
make it thrive, yeah.
I mean, I'm of Caribbean descent, and do you have any idea how upset I am at the price of oxtail right now? Like
It got trendy all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It got trendy.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, what in the world happened? I've been eating this for years, and now I can barely afford it.
Yeah.
When it used to be one of the cheapest things in the world. But because it got hot,
Yeah.
where did it come from? Culture driving.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I love, Gary, that you mentioned colonialism because Caribbean, Nigerian. And when you said we make things work, I'm like, I can see Lagos in my mind. That's everybody's doing it there, right? And when you, not to get super meta, but a little bit, why did colonialism even happen? Because people wanted to go, some people, certain people wanted to go other places to get better stuff.
Yeah.
Or to get new utility.
Yeah.
Or to get things they didn't have.
Right.
Or to get silk or spices or whatever to make things better. So is this just a way of our melting pot becoming the stew that it wants to be?
Yeah.
You know, I think there's something there, and it's also why, you know, you don't want a royal family mating with each other. What does it lead to? Mutation. Anybody remember biology?
Right.
This is the same principle.
Or the Habsburg Empire. Yeah, exactly.
You keep things the same, things get weird and bad.
Yeah. Okay. So you brought up melting pot, and I love the Nigerian bringing up stew. I did want to get to the signal that you were so excited to talk about, which is the difference between multicultural and inclusive marketing. And wow, you know, we may be in a future where you never hear the word melting pot ever again. Okay, so we've established that consumers are hungry for inclusive brands, inclusive experiences. We know that, right? So how does this demand translate into this good, smarter, inclusive marketing? So inclusion in marketing is a generally newer approach. This article argues one that diverges from multicultural marketing, which has for decades been the industry's approach to connecting with different identity groups. So what's the difference here? Where Sandy Archila, the writer of this piece, defines multicultural marketing as, quote, targeting specific segments on race, culture, or ethnicity, whereas inclusive marketing is designed to, quote, designed to connect with all people of all backgrounds. So what is the downside here, right? Like why might that make people nervous? Well, multicultural campaigns, Archila tells us, can sometimes produce one-dimensional stories that lead to exaggerated caricatures and may alienate the intended audience. Instead of finding universal values like the desire to support small businesses, multicultural marketing tends to silo people. It might drive impact really deeply, but it doesn't seem like it drives it broadly, right? And so therein lies the issue, right? We know that we want to go inclusive. We know that that's the right thing. This is what consumers look for. But if you're a brand looking to spend limited dollars, you may opt for the multicultural marketing approach because you say, you know, I really just want to hit Hispanics in this one key demo. I know that's who I'm going for. I'd rather put my limited budget here than try to go very broad, right? Now, we can discuss whether or not that's the right thing, but that might be some of the mindset. Well, we'll get there. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, well, let's jump in there. So why that is a way that some people think about this stuff. Why is that the wrong mindset? What's wrong with that?
I mean, I won't even talk about anything ethical or moral. It's inherently inefficient.
Go on.
To do more things than you need to do to produce a particular result.
Yeah.
And that's what we've decided that we've all bought in to do.
Yeah.
Now there are a lot of systems that rely on us being inefficient. A lot of media agencies, a lot of particular vendor relationships that rely on this idea that we have to do these different things for all the different people.
Yeah.
And by the way, we only have a little bit of money, like you said, left over for the folks who aren't from the major group that we've been talking to.
Right.
Not the folks who aren't from the group that might make us the most money.
Right.
Again, inefficient.
The most loyal customers.
The most loyal, but like that's when you look at the past to think about how you're going to grow. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
So it's not even economically viable from just a principles standpoint. And we've convinced ourselves that this is the way to do things when everything around us. Bridgerton's a good example I like to bring up of a show that like. Is it just for South Asian people? Of course it isn't.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can think about almost everything in that same way.
Yeah. And you know, Lola, I mean, if you'll indulge me for a second here, the last time you were sitting on that couch, I think we were in the same position. You and I, this was last year and talking about inclusive storytelling. You and I were discussing a moment where we were talking about So I forget what it was, but it was like an inclusive story that was geared towards like young women of color. And my mom had watched that, and I had mentioned that she had particularly liked that.
Is it Insecure?
Maybe.
It's
But the
Insecure,
idea
yeah.
was that it was that what mattered there was that this is content created for one group, but that has much broader impact.
But
And so
this thing is not even created for her.
Well, not created for one
I
group,
would say,
but-
honestly, I think Issa Rae would love to hear that your mom loves the show because it's the purpose, this is important distinction. The purpose of the show is to tell an untold story.
Exactly.
Just like I'm writing a book to hopefully share some untold insights. Gary's writing a paper and doing all the work he's doing to share untold facts. Like we're trying to enhance the lives around us with what we know. And that's not unique to any particular swim lane or group. The thing that multicultural marketing does, I'll take you back to a real example that happened right here near Bryant Park at a certain alcohol company when I was doing my MBA internship. As the only Black intern, this is years ago now, my project was to sell, well, I'll just call it Alco Pop, I won't name the name of the brand, to figure out how to better market Alco Pop as a competitor to 40-ounce malt liquors in urban areas. I mean, can you think about anything less inspiring than that as far as adding value?
Yeah.
And that's the idea of how we want to grow our multicultural market. It's just so base, and we can do better than that as humans. And when we do better than that, we're going to make more money than that.
I think actually Insecure is a perfect example between multicultural and inclusive, right? So it's not even necessarily from the way that I saw the conversations about why Insecure was made and why it was important. It's not that it was a story specifically for Black people. It was a story told by Black people, which made it authentic because it's from that experience. But everyone can understand the story. So multicultural, which is already just the way that it's executed, just an oxymoron, right? It's the problem that I've had forever in this industry. It's like, okay, general market and multicultural. Somehow general market is supposed to be everybody, but multicultural is one. Multi is in the word.
You're so right, Gary.
What is happening here? So the way it's executed is, okay, we're trying to figure out how to sell to this one community. So if you don't know how to do that, that means you don't understand it because you haven't been selling it to them in the first place? It's the approach that's the approach and the execution that's the problem. Inclusive, the way that it's viewed, approached, and executed makes it about, okay, who are the people who actually like what we have? What cultural differences may they have? What cultural intersections may they have? Because it's about an entire audience, not about one piece that we clearly have not been paying attention to or fully respecting in the first place.
Right.
That's the difference.
Well, and I would add, too, that I think what you're bringing up, Gary, it creates a bit of an argument for the McKinsey narrative, right? Because inclusive isn't always about appealing to all people. It does mean shining a light on where you have those opportunities. And I would add to Gary's list, problems that have not been solved. Because that's the simplest way to new market share. That's the simplest way to growth. Is like when you literally, that's what startups do. They solve new problems. That's innovation. So if you want to find an easy path to innovation, solve a problem for a consumer that's relevant to your brand and your industry that you haven't. And if there are no problems to solve, then again, how can you create that delight, that, belonging, anything else? But the problems are the place to start, I think.
And we talked about this because I think the most tangible example can be in product innovation, and a lot of beauty brands have experimented in creating products for people with disabilities, right? There you go. But thinking about, there's it's mascara, by the way, right? And you can open it with one hand. So someone who has one hand, right, it makes it easier. But then also you zoom out, and how many times are you doing different things, and like not doing this would be beneficial. And so just a practical way of thinking, if you're designing, or building content through a lens of inclusivity and thinking about a marginalized group or a group that has a particular need, then you have a much broader opportunity, going back to the business example. And then just on Gary's point with Insecure, and I think the author talks about this, of inclusive marketing is about telling everyday stories.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
And it's through the lens of a particular group. It's not about focusing in on one thing that they think applies to this quote unquote one group of people as a monolith, and then amplifying that. So how do you change that narrative as well?
That's what I think, and that's what, it's funny, that was the real takeaway that I had from that experience a year ago, was this conversation about like, okay, what's driving the value of that storytelling is the universality.
Yeah. Well, think about it. This is like what I think, honestly, for us Black people, when we hear this, we're like, what did they think we were reading our entire childhood?
Sure.
Like when I was 14 and I said Pride and Prejudice was my favorite book, there ain't nobody even look or anything like me in that book.
Yeah.
Right? But it's Jane Austen, for goodness sake.
Right.
But I love that book.
Yeah.
And so it's now everyone else is opening themselves up to this idea that it doesn't just have to be about me to appeal to me.
Yeah.
And I love your mom for that.
Yeah, no, I think...
One other quick thing about the makeup.
Go ahead.
Are you going to tease what we learned about that, or should I?
Go for it.
Okay, so my friends at Sparks and Honey very, very graciously helped with some research for my book, Responsible Marketing. And, well, it's your study. I just kind of was involved in it. Very, very exciting stuff. One of the things we learned is that people of all sort of ability levels are more likely to buy that makeup that was created to help someone who has those mobility issues opening things.
Yeah.
Everybody is more likely to buy it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have that proof in the pudding.
Yeah, and I think if you think back to those consumers who are more likely to buy Black brands, I think they're also probably more likely to buy Indigenous brands or brands owned by women. And that when you open up that door for one group, those universal values carry over. Let's look at two more signals. We'll just do these, we'll speed up just a little bit here. But I did want to talk about the fact that, okay, we have established this desire for inclusive commerce. We know that they're inclusive values to our marketing. How do you pull that off, like from a creative standpoint? And so just very quickly, this is an article about Zoila Darton. She is a Jewish, Panamanian, Jamaican creative director who's profiled in this signal. And basically she talks about how burnt out she was by the ad industry and its inability to move past the status quo, right? I mean, most creative directors look like me in all black, right? And this does not mean that those people know all the cool stories. So she launched Word Creative, a platform where creatives of color can connect with brands and make it simpler to find inclusive talent that the ad world often complains it can't find, which is, to be clear, absolutely ridiculous, but it is a common complaint, and now you don't have an excuse, ad world. So the platform has 221 different creative contractors at the time this was published, and they've managed to end up in campaigns from everything from Nike to Converse, Meta, and, as we were just saying, HBO. So I guess I'd love to start here with like the very, very basics, right? Why do you need to make sure, just, let's make this very simple. Why is it valuable to make sure that creative directors are a diverse bunch? How does that feed inclusive marketing? Anybody want to take that softball?
Sure, I'll start with it. It's a conversation that I've been having with colleagues for the longest time in this industry. Oh, we don't know where to find the people, yet you know how to steal their work. I don't get it.
Boom.
You copy their work, but you can't find the people to, come on. I remember I was at RGA, not that they steal people's work, to be clear, but I remember being at RGA and seeing both Denny's and IHOP tweet either hash browns or pancakes on fleek. I almost threw my laptop out the window.
Jesus.
And so did everyone else in my vicinity. And that's what I was talking about when I was talking about cultural colonization. Oh, so you think that because someone said it and because it's just out there, I can just take it and it's fine.
Yeah.
That's not how things work.
Yeah.
It may not be the biggest loss to you in the moment, but over time it will turn into a loss. Yeah. So stop claiming that we can't find the people because we're looking for a certain person from a certain school.
Someone who fits our culture.
Yet we're taking the work of the people that we can't find.
Yeah.
Just bring the people in. Just bring them in. It's very easy.
It's so easy to find them now. It's not even hard anymore.
I think that's the real keen insight here. And
there's 100 companies doing this. Didn't I see Kenny?
Yeah.
100 Roses of Concrete. There's so many places where you can go. And it's why I will lose it on not lose it, but I will politely lose it on anyone on LinkedIn who goes on and posts like, can you just help introduce me to some creators and call? I was like, no, Google it.
Yeah.
Find it yourself. They're all over the place.
Spend a little money.
Spend a little
even.
money. Spend a
Go
little time.
Go 4 posts down on LinkedIn.
That's it.
They're there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other thing, I'm gonna take it back to Darwin again. Why is this important? Natural selection, mutations. We're not gonna have anything good coming out if it's all the same going in.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stick with the biology argument today.
Yeah. All right. Davian, can I ask you very quickly to make the capitalist argument here? Because I'm curious if there's a way to prove like a one-to-one here, where it's like you're talking to some very nervous professionals at an advertising agency. How do you tell them that it's like that there is true value to driving this inclusive marketing via inclusive talent?
There's literally many data sources around whether it's creativity, whether it's innovation, upwards of 30 to 40% in terms of profitability when you have diverse teams. I mean, I think, just from an idea standpoint of a, generative thinking, new perspectives, you're going to be creating in a way that pushes you ahead, that makes you more competitive, let alone the other side of when you don't have that and where you have the faux pas that can cause, millions, billions, of one tweet that goes out, goes viral.
Yeah.
And because nobody, in the room, or nobody with power in the room to make, a different decision or a different call in terms of what was being created. So it's on both sides in terms of it's not just about, making sure nothing terrible goes out, but also how can we think about it in terms of the positive aspect of what you can create and the opportunities that are there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I want to take this back to something else that's important. Why are we asking more questions around this stuff? Like, that's something that I really want every single brand leader listening to this or watching this to think about. If you're going to ask more questions of me when I come in wanting to pitch a diverse creative idea than you are when VaynerMedia comes in wanting to pitch Tom Brady or whatever, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
We are holding this work to a higher standard, and we're not asking anybody to defend why they should keep doing it the same way.
Yeah.
So why are we asking why we shouldn't try something new?
Yeah.
Or something that's obviously not been done as much and thus will likely produce more effects? I feel it's actually debasing ourselves to continue to try to make this financial argument when there isn't one having to be made on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Especially when we see from either co-option or from success that this way works every time. How do we have to keep?
Did they ask that when the TikTok, when there was that Pepsi, the Bud Light commercial? Was it Bud Light? When they stole the TikTok dance from Black creators for Super Bowl. Do you remember this, Gary?
Yes.
Do you think that there was a money conversation?
I think there was after a lawsuit, maybe.
Well, no, maybe, but like, do you think it was I don't know if this TikTok dance thing is gonna work. How do we know it's gonna work? No.
Yeah.
It was just, let's take this dance and have these white people do this dance.
Right. And I also have some science as to why culturally it does work. That's what this paper is about.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally, there's a scientific formula that has to do with innovation and imitation.
Yeah.
And how innovation drives imitation.
Yeah.
And how it scales imitation.
So a basic
that's,
fact of,
just a little bit of math that proves what we have already seen over and over and over again.
Yeah.
That's the argument.
Well, I want to thank you guys for indulging this idiot proofing session, because I think sometimes there are these big concepts, and every once in a while we have to have a little bit of a do-better moment, right?
Well, and hopefully
it's critical,
it's obvious, but to state it, it's also not bringing Black creatives or creatives of color in to develop content for that particular group, right? It's not about just elevating or, checking over work that's directed towards one audience. It uplifts all of the work that's being done. So I think that's also the important distinction as we have that conversation.
If I'm good enough to ghostwrite your speeches, that's sometimes what a CMO advisor does, then I'm also good enough to create the content for external audiences. And I don't mean me, I mean a Black person. Like, so if we can be you, then we can absolutely market to anyone.
Well, and it's funny because a few brief couple months ago, we were discussing in a briefing the occasional joy that people feel when they see an ad they love, a product they love, they see the person behind it and they go, oh, they're black, oh, they're gay. There's like, it's exciting to see that you're like, this is incredible work, and I had no idea that and sometimes we want to know that up front, but sometimes there's a joy in just being like, oh, cool.
Calendly. I felt that way when I found out the founder of Calendly is Nigeria. He hasn't accepted my LinkedIn request yet, but sorry.
What are you waiting for?
I didn't even say that loud.
Lola, we were just talking about you being too on LinkedIn. I'd love to get to our final signal here, just to wrap things up. Look, okay, so we've talked about, the inclusive consumer, inclusive marketing, inclusive storytelling. Now I think we just very quickly need to talk about the audience. And this is a great article that Davian sent me that I think is really fabulous about the font of all culture today, which is black teenage girls hanging out in their bedrooms doing stuff online. And this article basically from Vox just talks about like literally how important this is. This is a group that is tech savvy, they are creative, they are incredibly informed for their age. That's a pretty radical trend, a difference between just a generation above them. And Vox describes this group as the nuclei of American cultural production. Quote, the trends that often start in their bedrooms of ambitious black girls, gamer attention from big brands and marketers, creating influencers almost overnight. To be a black teenage girl, or to be a teenage girl, especially a black one, the author wrote, is to simultaneously be pop culture's ultimate punching bag, cash cow, and gatekeeper. And yet, as it's also noted in here, these young women behind so many trends are often invisible. They go uncredited, just as you were saying, Gary. And so I guess the question is, look, we know these are cultural powerhouses. We know that these are the kind of people who are going to drive the ideas, the inspiration for things that are going to become marketing, that are going to become content elsewhere. And we talk so much about showing up. And what I'd love to end our briefing on today is, how do we show up for these people? How do we show up? Even if it's just young kids hanging out in their bedrooms, whatever they're, but the kind who are invisible, the kind who are not the ones who are, dragged onto Neutrogena ads, right? Or whatever ads are gonna feature them. Like, how do we show up for these invisible content creators who are so crucial to culture and yet often go ignored?
It's easy.
Yeah.
If they want to be visible, help them be visible.
Exactly.
Don't just take their shit.
Yeah.
How about say, hey, can you tell us how to use this? Can we pay you to help us with this thing? Because what you just did here is clearly amazing.
Yeah.
This is not hard.
Yeah.
It goes under the, how do we find the people? Well, we've already found them.
Yeah.
Well, how do we show up for them? Hey, maybe just instead of taking their stuff, bring them into.
DMs exist for a reason.
Yeah. Just literally, hey, stop taking their stuff.
Yeah.
Here's the mic.
Yeah, so I think that's the approach creatively. I think that's really important. What about some of the other brand values that we discussed today? How do we show up for these young people, these audiences, these inclusive consumers of the future when we think about things like core values, social justice, sustainability, all those kind of things?
I think it goes back to solving their problems.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the ones that are top of mind for them. Like, I need a lipstick cap that does something differently. For these young women, maybe it's I need something at my price point. I need something that matches my skin tone. What I need, you're going to create. But then there's also, when you mention the big R, responsible marketing stuff, like there's I need a world to live in.
Yeah.
So it can't be like, atrophied and no water to drink and whatever.
Yeah.
And like storms everywhere. Like we kind of need to exist to make any money or have any things.
Yeah.
So that's where you are also solving problems and meeting needs. So I think it goes back to that. And to Gary's point of putting them in front of the camera, I wanted to bring up another really exciting example we saw last year. Soo-Young Kang, CMO of EOS. Does anybody remember what she did? She actually took a YouTuber who'd had this like funny phrase about, had a funny method for how to actually shave like your intimate areas.
Okay.
And she put her on the pack.
Amazing.
Saying, bless your effing C word.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to say it on TV? Okay.
That's one of the like three words we avoid saying on the briefing.
Right, I know, sorry. But also it was in CVS.
That's wild.
And that was wildly successful financially. That same CMO told me in an interview that she actually uses mostly non-white creators. And when she made that decision, including black women creators, she saw sales skyrocket.
Love it.
And she was like, I don't even question it. It's just working.
Yeah.
So Give them the mic.
Yeah, love that. Davian, final thoughts? How do we show up as inclusive consumers? Marketers, how do we do this?
I mean, I agree with both points. I mean, I think the visibility is important, but that, I mean, comes in different ways. I think that's one in terms of actually putting, on the pack, et cetera, perpetuating a brand. Partnership, not appropriation. So often, and I know there were a few examples in the article where it was, someone going out on the streets of New York City and then coming back and, from observation of trends, which, I mean, code for watching young Black girls, streetwear, et cetera, and then appropriating that and not even, giving proper attribution. I think also it's interesting, I mean, it's Gen Z Black females, but oftentimes in the Gen Z culture conversations, the trends are, very broadly attributed to Gen Z, even language, et cetera. Gen Z slang, you had a piece on that, where these are, words that have...
Hey, queen. No, Denny's, please don't say that either, right?
Yeah,
like,
they
it's the
haven't
fleek
already.
thing.
Yeah.
They probably have.
So I think it's an acknowledgement, one, but then it's also, I mean, it has to have financial, implications for the parties involved. So it can't just be, I'm giving you credit. I mean, that's one, yes, and make sure that there is consent when it comes to some of these areas, but then also how are you making sure that you are creating opportunities for wealth generation, whether that's a partnership you're buying into this company or entity this person has today or could have, or paying them directly or bringing them onto your brand as a consultant or an ongoing contributor. There's lots of options, but it can't just be, just about the acknowledgement.
I love, can I say, just as a final thought, I love the idea of bringing actual customers onto the pack, because it shows so directly like your level of relationship with the customer, and it shows that you care about them, that you're not like appropriating from them, that like literally this is designed for you, and what a difference that is than having some caricature be on the pack and supposed to represent the brand when that person, when that is a very problematic
mind-boggling to me
thing.
that there have not been more copycats of that.
Yeah,
it just goes to show how much bureaucracy limits creativity. We won't get into that. That'll be the next brief.
Yeah, that's the next
But
brief.
it's just come on. Of course that worked.
Yeah.
Who else is going to do it? Come on.
Well, let's leave on that awesome note. This has been such an incredible panel. I mean, we'll have to pick this up the next time we have you all on. And just a note of personal privilege. This is not an easy topic. We're talking about complex work-related stuff and complex identity-related stuff. So I want to thank everybody in the room today for joining us, for being a part of this conversation, for showing up, as we were talking about. And of course, an enormous shout out to Davian, who helped spearhead this briefing, and then our guests, Gary and Lola, who, come over absolutely whenever. That's going to take us through our briefing for the day. You can join us Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at noon New York time on our LinkedIn page. While you're there, jump in the comment section. Let us know your thoughts on the day's subjects. As you can see, we've got a big, great audience of guests. We would love to have you in. Feel free to jump on our website, sign up, come hang out with us in person here in Midtown Manhattan. So until next week, consider yourselves briefed.
You're so good at this. I love it.